Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. One playoff race down, 9 playoff races to go. One driver knows he's going to be racing on into the round of 12. Everyone else vying for 11 more spots this weekend at Kansas. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by racing analyst extraordinaire Chris Werme. And Wormser, we don't have to sweat the 5 getting knocked out in the first round of the postseason, at least in 2023.
I'm excited about that. You know, Dave Wood messaged me. He goes, well, it wasn't the race we thought it was going to be, but it's good for our future. So I would agree with that. It's big to win early in these rounds. The pressure, and I'm not saying that it's going to be easy the next couple of weeks, but it's definitely a different scenario than say, I don't know, even Martin Truex Jr. for the next couple of weeks. Like, you still have to put things together. And like I said, I thought Larson had not holding back, but it's nice to see him go out there and get a win and solidify himself as like, okay, I'm back. And we talked about this in the past with that 5-24 team that not that they were holding anything back, but maybe they were trying other things. And Larson was fast all weekend.
We've seen a little bit of that in the past. I mean, the 24 operated that way late in the regular season before he really turned it on in the postseason last year. You mentioned Kyle Larson, of course. He was a rightful favorite going into Darlington, and sometimes in this sport, the fastest car does win. Thankfully, we had a head-to-head matchup with the 5 over the 19 that we gave out as our best bet on Sunday. Unfortunately, for those who tuned into your pre-race poll who may have had a little bit of exposure to the 45, always a bridesmaid, never a bride as it pertained to Tyler Reddick. Just couldn't beat the 5 off of pit road, and it was Tyler Reddick coming home second. And when we look at a handicap, we always provide a postmortem. And for those folks that are tuning in who may be football fans but are going, wait a second, you guys have a NASCAR podcast on the Bet the Board feed. We break this up into 3 parts. Stage 1, it's all about what we learned and what we can apply going forward. Stage 2, a lot of betting basics. All this weekend, we're going to provide a little bit of an odds reset as we know one car is moving on in the playoffs. And of course, stage 3, all about trying to figure out the proper way to handicap the upcoming race weekend. And I think, we tell listeners when we get things right, we're very honest with ourselves when we get things wrong. And, I kind of want to look at it in terms of what we got right last weekend in our handicap at Darlington. Kyle Larson, we had a feeling was the car to beat. He went out there and dusted the field. We believed that Kevin Harvick was going to have a faster car than a lot of the drivers that were out there, most notably the 9 and the 17 and a couple others. A poorly timed caution, and suddenly Kevin Harvick goes from racing for a chance for a win to getting a penalty under yellow flag conditions, and he was never relevant again. You said, though, you liked Ross Chastain quite a bit. We had some exposure to him pre-week. That number drifted out. Chastain started so deep in the field, but arguably one of the most impressive drives of anybody for Ross Chastain to turn that car into a top 5 finish.
Yeah, and you saw it. You actually, if you were watching the race, and I think that's where we're different is I'm watching Ross Chastain running 25th. I think it's important to look at his lap times. Hey, were we right or were we wrong on this guy?
You sound like an F1 fan. Now, I'm not going to watch the front of the field.
Yeah.
That's not where all the intrigue is. I'm going to watch the middle of the pack, and that's where I'm going to pay attention.
Well, I watch them all. I watch it all. And it's important to see. It's different
in NASCAR because somebody that's actually 25th at one point in the race can still go on to win the race instead of being 27 seconds behind the leader.
Exactly. So I was a little concerned when the leaders were coming up on Chastain. Remember, when you have 115 green flag laps for stage 1, that means that the tail end of the field, you better get going because the leaders are going to be coming fast. You're going to have 2 green flag pit stops in that time period. If you make one mistake, you go a lap down. And it was hard to pass. And twice, Chastain was the next car to go a lap down. But even Denny talked about in his podcast, it was hard to pass the 1. It was hard to pass the 99. That's because they were good cars. It was hard for them to also make passes. So the fact that he was able to stay on the lead lap and twice Denny was not able to make the pass. And Denny was a rocket for that first half of the race. And he kind of controlled the whole thing. But I always knew that Ross was good. I even put out a tweet that said, like, I'm still convinced Ross is good. And slowly but surely he worked his way to the front. But I think that this highlights one of those things where if you don't make mistakes and you have speed in your race car, you can get there, but it still takes a little bit of luck. Without the luck, without all those cautions, I don't know that Ross drives to the top 5, but I certainly think he stays in the lead lap. Maybe he finishes in the top 15, a 12th place finish, which I think at this point for them, they have to be happy with. I think if you were to ask him on Monday of last week, they'd be pretty disappointed. But after their qualifying effort, 5th place, a damn good finish for that team.
You mentioned the 99 of Daniel Suarez. One car he couldn't pass, of course, was the 48 of Alex Bowman. The two of them took each other out in an unceremonious sequence of events there. A little bit of petty bullshit, but not playoff driver, so you can understand why frustrations got the best of him. In terms of what we got wrong, I'll be the first one to own it, Worm.
Yeah.
I thought the 17 was going to struggle. I thought he was overvalued in the betting market. We had a head-to-head matchup with Brad Keselowski matched up against Chris Buescher. If you tell me Brad going into the race is going to finish 6th, I'm actually going to make that a multi-position bet on the 6th. Chris Buescher went out there, exceeded odds makers' expectations, came home 3rd. And quite frankly, a guy that I'm not sure I want to bet against right now, given how well he's running and some of the speed we're seeing as Chris Buescher is quickly coming of age.
He's a no-fade zone. You can't look at his track history and say, oh, you know, he struggles here. Well, he doesn't struggle much anymore. If you look at his past 6 finishes, 3rd, 1st, 7th, 11th, 1st.
Pretty good,
That is someone that goes on a no-fade list. I don't care how bad they've been in the past at a track. Darlington was certainly a track where he struggled. I thought that as a driver's track, we were just talking about this kind of before we jumped on air here, that usually when it comes to a driver's track, you see guys like Keselowski, guys like Harvick that late in the race figure out how to conserve their tires and find a way to work themselves into that top 5. Well, Chris Buescher's figured out how to do that too. So now it's time for us to treat him like, not saying that he's going to win races, but he's a contender that can get a good finish out of his car. And you know what? He was decent in practice. I think he got a little bit more out of his car. Now, it was a little bit of unlucky things, but at this point, Chris Buescher's on a no-fade list for me. He just exceeds expectations. He's running. He's getting just more out of his race car, and he's finishing better than his average running position. And that is a recipe for a guy that can compete week in and week out. He's on the no-fade list for me.
Yeah, you got to figure out what you have in your car, exactly how hard you need to push it. If you have a hot rod, you don't have to take some of those chances. And I think Denny Hamlin highlighted some of that going, look, if I have a car that has speed, I don't need to take unnecessary risks at any point during the race because I know I'm going to be there late. Whereas if track position, as we've seen in the next gen era, is so important, if I have a mediocre car, I have to do everything I can to pick off spots, and I may have to take some risks a lot earlier than I otherwise would. In terms of some of the other things that we saw unfold in Sunday's marathon of a race, you know, what stood out to you? I mean, Kevin Harvick, we already talked about, you know, a poorly timed caution, nothing he can really do, although I'm still trying to figure out why he didn't just drive through pit road instead of changing his tires. A little bit of a confusing situation there for a veteran driver. Denny Hamlin, a loose wheel, probably has a chance to at least finish in the top 3 worst case scenario if that situation doesn't unfold. And I do have to give credit, I guess, to, you know, HMS overall. Alex Bowman was running inside the top 10 before his day went awry. But Kyle Larson, race-winning speed. William Byron quietly put together a good run. And, oh, by the way, the 9 car may just happen to have a little bit of extra juice under the hood for these next couple races, as we've already seen him take money in the outright market this week at Kansas.
Well, I just think something that we need to highlight is we used to say, well, you just can't make mistakes in this race. And I think we have to extend that out into practice and qualifying. I can't believe that Martin Truex Jr. was never really mentioned all weekend. I mean, this is the guy that was the favorite to win this championship going into this race at a track where he qualified well and led a ton of laps earlier in the season. He's been extremely successful at Darlington. And for him to go out and struggle in qualifying, I kind of thought that was an anomaly. But it's amazing, probably the psychological shift that happens on that team. Like, we're sitting 31st. Yes, they do have a very cushy lead heading into this week at Kansas. But that has to hurt your momentum. A team that had speed week in and week out, you're going to this potentially the best track for this driver, and you lay an egg. And it certainly isn't because of Martin Truex Jr.'s talent. There was something with that race car that they didn't expect, and that threw me off big time. I think that's the number one takeaway. We didn't talk about Martin Truex Jr. all day. The second thing would be, hey, you can't make mistakes, Denny Hamlin, and he knows it. He goes out there and he threw away the race, and that's something he's done a couple times this year. I think he's taken control, certainly of Darlington, and he's taken control of Richmond and Martinsville, and he's thrown those wins away. You can't do that week in and week out. That's going to hurt you. If you flip that around, I'm going to tell you someone like William Byron, who doesn't make mistakes, and also Chris Buescher's done this. These guys are just getting finishes. They're just, it's like maybe take that extra second on pit road. Maybe you lose an extra spot or two, but it doesn't put you to the rear of the field. The rear of the field these days are death. If there was one track where you could drive from the back to the front, it would be Darlington. So the fact that Truex wasn't able to do it, the fact that Chastain needed to get lucky in order to do it with what I thought was a good car, you better just not make mistakes if you want to move on. I know that seems really simple, but this sport it's as hard to win now than ever because it's as hard to pass now as ever. So I understand you got to get it when you can, whether you can be a 10th or two faster on pit road and pick up spots. But at this point, it just seems like get it right and then let the race shake out because people are going to make mistakes and teams have done it week in and week out. We've seen so many drivers just throw away the lead on the last green flag stop or the last pit stop of the day. You just can't do it.
It's so much different. To your point, it's not just having speed in the race car. It's everyone doing their jobs, from the drivers to the entire pit crew to the crew chief when it comes to strategy. And all of those pieces have to work in harmony with one another for you to get a win, especially as the stakes continue to get cranked up over the next 9 races. We'll wave the green-white checkered flag and officially put a bow on what we saw transpire at Darlington. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there at Todd Fuhrman. And most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. NFL and college football in full swing, the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. So many different ways to get your gambling fix, not only at the track, but at the gridiron, or on the gridiron, I should say, all fall long. Worm, as we get into stage 2, last week we talked a little bit about how we should approach the big picture odds to win the championship, and you got some good feedback. People asking, should that factor into how they handicap each individual race? And I think you had a great answer. You said you have to look at them at all being siloed. Essentially, your futures bets this far out are sunk costs. You still want to root for them. You want them to be in a good spot, but they shouldn't impact any of the wagering that you're doing for a given race. We've seen Kyle Larson move to co-favorite territory alongside William Byron, Martin Truex, and Denny Hamlin, depending on the book right there. It's that tier of 4 drivers that's going to be the same tier that are considered favorites this weekend that are favorites. When you look in that middle tier, Kyle Busch and Chris Buescher have seen their odds shorten, and that's where things start to get interesting. Anything really change for you one race into the playoffs, or still very much a wait-and-see approach? I can't imagine you're running to the window to bet the 34 car of Michael McDowell at 500 to 1 now to be a Cup Series champion.
No, I think that right now, I feel like the market's pretty efficient. If I were to say that there was one driver where there's a little bit of value, I would say, just looking back, Kevin Harvick had a lot faster car than his finish. And if he goes out there and wins that race, his price is not 30 to 1. And I'm not saying that Darlington's going to translate necessarily to these next few tracks or even get him in. I understand that his current point situation is not healthy, on the outside looking in, but he's also Kevin Harvick and he has a great history everywhere. I think that the intriguing part about the playoff odds will be what happens with Larson these next 2 races. He's through to the next round. The next round is the biggest question mark, hands down, in the playoffs. It is Texas, where we saw massive tire failures last year. Whoever was out there leading tend to hit, blow a tire and hit the wall. You got Talladega. We know that that's a coin toss. That's a lottery. And then you got the Charlotte Roval. That's also been the same thing where, hey, it's kind of track position. The right cautions fall and, your strategy could be perfect. So I think that if I'm this 5 team and I'm heavy on his futures, I think I've been quite clear all year that even up to last week, 7 to 1, that was the best bet on the board, him and Tyler Reddick. I think that you got to take these next couple weeks, even though Kansas is a great track, it's kind of go get your bonus points or better figure something out for Texas, because Texas is the one place where he can go out and I think lead a lot of laps and win this race. The Toyotas have been really fast on the Kansas and the Texas type track. So if he can figure something out at Kansas that can help him at Texas, I think that's what I would be focusing on with this 5 team. I don't care if he finishes like 7th or 8th place or maybe doesn't have a race winning car. If they can get a leg up heading into Texas, where you have 3 more races and a fresh slate, I think that's really important. Bristol's a big wild card, and that's the last race. That's in 2 weeks. That's the last race of this round. I don't know this has any bearing on anything. Kyle Larson's going to be really good there. I don't know that he can transfer anything from that Bristol race to help him in the future at all. So I think that if I'm this week, I'm Kyle Larson. I am working on things for Texas. And if it happens to work out great for Kansas, perfect. We'll take the bonus points. Otherwise, we have got to make sure we're moving on to that final round, or the round of 8, where it's Las Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville. He's been great at Vegas, obviously great at Homestead, and won at Martinsville earlier this year. I think Larson and this 5 team should be the favorites, and I think that you could see that price shorten up even a little bit.
Yeah, and he's a driver that I kind of said to you before we got started, I'd probably want no part of betting in some of his head-to-head matchups over the next 2 weeks, just not knowing what his philosophy is going to be. And along those same lines, I mean, the 22 team was pretty honest last year when Joey Logano went on to win the championship. He said what allowed him to be so good at Phoenix was the fact that he won at Vegas and didn't have to sweat that entire round of 8. They were able to put all of their resources into building a championship caliber car, went out there, took care of business. And I don't think enough emphasis is placed on how important it is to win early in these elimination phases, because it takes some of the pressure off. You use the word testing, and I think it's the perfect approach for these teams, knowing that the next phase is probably the most unpredictable that we're going to get in the entire playoffs when we try and handicap this field.
Yeah, I think the other guy that's interesting is Reddick was 25-1 going into this last race. And all of a sudden he showed speed. He ends up with a 2nd place finish. I think arguably the 2nd best car. I mean, it's hard to, in the daytime, it was definitely Larson was the best, but nighttime fell. Those top 3 cars, whether it was Denny, Reddick, Larson, Harvick, Buescher, whoever got out front, it was going to be really hard to pass. But you've seen, Tyler Reddick shift from that 25-1 to 14-1. Remember, this is a guy that's shown speed recently. He gave it up at Richmond. He gave it up at Michigan. I know that he hasn't had the same speed on the road courses, but he's showing speed on ovals. And Tyler Reddick can win anywhere. I'll be the first to say that. Just because he's struggling on his road courses, what are typically his forte, we've got some ovals coming up, and he's been solid at Kansas. He's been solid at Texas. I still think that Reddick at 14-1 still has a little bit of value, because I think he's going to win a race in the playoffs. And if that's at Vegas, Homestead, or Martinsville, he's moving on to Phoenix, and that's not a bad ticket to have.
He's definitely got a path. Let's put it that way in terms of when you look at each different segment, there's a track where Tyler Reddick no doubt has it circled going, hey, look, if I can get through the first stage, I'm going to be just fine. If I can get to the Roval with a chance, I like my odds there. And if I can get to Homestead, being very much in control of my own destiny, or Vegas, I'm in very good shape. The situation the 45 car won't want to be in is going to Martinsville. Needing to win to go through. So clearly these teams have a game plan laid out, and that's what makes watching these odds so fascinating as we look to try and identify some of the opportunity. Green, white, checkered flag on stage 2. We head into stage 3 and a full breakdown of Kansas. I think it's the Hollywood Casino 400 or whatever the hell they're calling it. Really don't get paid by any of those advertisers. So it doesn't make one hill of beans difference if we get those things right. As far as track history is concerned, at Kansas, you had Denny Hamlin win here in the spring, and you've had other winners, 445 XI win in the past. Jesus, 23 XI.
Goodness gracious. Have another one.
Struggle bussing it right now. Last couple winners after that. Denny Hamlin, Bubba Wallace last fall, Kurt Busch. So all Toyotas have won in the next gen era. Before that, it was Larson, Kyle Busch, Logano, and Denny Hamlin back to back. As we always do when we look at the track specs and comps, Kansas is a 1.5 mile, 2.4 kilometer track for all of our friends north of the border. Tri-oval track in Kansas City, Kansas, built in 2001, currently hosts 2 annual NASCAR race weekends. D-shaped oval, higher tire wear of the intermediate tracks, obviously not in the same level as Homestead or Darlington. When we look at 1.5-mile tracks, I know they're not all the cookie cutter variety, but suffice to say it's Charlotte, Kansas 1, and Las Vegas, 3 tracks you're placing the most emphasis on.
I would say that obviously Kansas 1, is really important. But I would say Charlotte is kind of the next track. Anytime where the line at Kansas typically moves to the top, right? So, but it doesn't have the tire wear of a place like Homestead. Whereas you see Vegas, you see kind of like the bottom feeders or kind of the middle of the track. Where Charlotte, sometimes you can see that tire wear start to be a little bit higher, but also the groove move up a little bit. So I would say Charlotte next. And by saying that, that just puts a nuke into what we would think about what's going to happen this week, because we saw something at Charlotte that we didn't see in the past. So we'll visit that. But I would say, in my opinion, it is Kansas, then Charlotte, then Vegas, then kind of the Darlington Homestead. I would say maybe even Homestead more than Darlington. But I'm sure that there's some models out there that might say something different. But my eyeballs tell me that is the current order.
All right, let's get right into it then and get into some of the driver specifics here. And we can start with the man who got to victory lane when we were here earlier this year, that, of course, being the 11 car of Denny Hamlin. You look at his current form, he's led 239 laps over his last couple of races. He's run up front in all of them. Back-to-back finishes, 25th or worse. I'm not sure you put much stock in it, knowing how good he was last weekend at Darlington. 19th or worse, though, in 3 or 4 races. So current form, not exactly ideal. But he does have the 4th best average finish so far this season. He's 26 points clear of the cut line. When you look at his track history here, he won the spring race and led 34 laps in the process. Martin Truex was actually the last driver to sweep a season series at Kansas, coming way back in 2017. So Denny, a chance to flirt with history. Top 5 finishes in 6 of his last 8 trips here. Won here 3 times during that particular span. And when you look at the 11, he's driven through the field in 5 of those 8 races, starting 10th or worse. Denny Hamlin buying or selling at his pre-week price.
Well, if you look at the last 5 races, I mean, this guy has led the most laps on average over the last 5 races. But then when you look at his average finishes, he's like outside the top 10. So clearly this team has a lot of speed. It's hard to win these races, and they love to make mistakes late in the race. And I don't know if it's the team is forcing it or Denny's forcing it, or maybe everyone's just kind of pushing a little bit too hard. But at this point in the week, it's really important to make sure you're kind of predicting where the market goes. And if you look at this 11 team, the last 3 races at Kansas, yes, their average finish is 2.3, but their average start is 17th. So they've struggled a little bit in qualifying here. Now, does that not mean he could go out? Like, he could obviously go out there and have a good qualifying, but at this point, none of the numbers are pointing there. So where's his number going to go? By the way, Denny started on the front row last week and led a lot of laps, but he still wasn't the favorite. Kyle Larson was still the favorite. So I don't think he's going to go from 11.2 to plus 350 or something like that. I think you're just going to kind of see him hang out. If anything, you'll see his price drift up. So I'm going to wait and see what happens after practice and qualifying.
Martin Truex, current price, very similar to Denny Hamlin. When you look at his current form, he's led just 4 laps over the last 4 races. However, for the season, he's led 14% or thereabouts of total laps so far. 6 races of finishes no worse than 7th, but now back-to-back finishes of 18th or worse when you look at how things have kind of trended. His average finish inside the top 12 this year was the best in the series, 15 top 10s, 9 top 5s. 25 points clear of the cut line. When you look at his track history at Kansas, came home 8th here in the spring. 3 finishes in the next-gen car, no worse than 8th, yet no better than 5th. 8 straight top 10s at this track and top 10 in 12 of the 13 trips he's made here. Only 1 driver rating clear of 102 in his last 6 races here. Tells me he's been good and consistent at this track, just not great to support the way he's being priced.
Yeah, I would say if he was more in like that 8-1 price range, I'd be interested. But right now, I just feel like it's slightly overvalued for a guy that can just kind of disappear. Now, I don't think that that's what's going to happen this week. He started 4th here earlier this year. He led a lot of laps. He had a ton of fast laps. His average running position was a top 4. I do think that Martin Truex Jr. is going to be a player this week. For whatever reason, with Darlington, even though it's one of his great tracks, it's really tough to pass there. There's like a groove and a half, and they expect people to make passes. So I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass. But if they unload and struggle again, I'm a little concerned for this 19 team, because mile and a halves are supposed to be their bread and butter. And if they struggle this week, I think that maybe they peaked a little too soon. And because of that, I do think that maybe he's a little bit overvalued. Now, could he go out there and have a great weekend? Yes, but I still don't think his price is going anywhere from this 4.5 or 5-1 range. So again, I guess if I had to pick between Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr., I would actually say Martin Truex Jr. because there's a chance he could go out there, put it on the pole, lead almost every single lap, and dust the field, because that's what he does. Denny Hamlin likes to dust the field for the first 80% of the race and then piss it away with a late race mistake. So that's why I like Truex more at that 11.5 to, or 11.5, 11 to 2. Or
if you get 11.5 to 1, let me know. I'm on board with 11.5 to 1 to try and start building my portfolio.
But that's why I like Truex more, is when he goes out there and he's leading laps, he's the guy to beat. And if he restarts in the top 5, he's going to beat you. It's when he goes to the rear, the rare times that that's happened, or the rare moment where Chris Buescher just pulls a rabbit out of the hat. I like Truex more than I like Hamlin. For that reason, is I trust Truex when he has the best car to stay the best car all day. Denny, he'll piss it away.
Toyota teammates are one thing, HMS teammates another. When we look at Kyle Larson right in that 6-1 range and William Byron hovering around 8. As far as Kyle Larson's current form, back-to-back 26 or worse finishes came to an end with his hot rod and race-winning car on Sunday. 3 top 8 finishes over his last 5 races. You look at mile and a half, second in Vegas to start the year, second at Kansas, and 30th at Charlotte. Finished in the top 4 of the 6 races on intermediate track so far this season. When you look at his track history overall at Kansas, finished second here back in the spring, started 7th or better in 3 next-gen races here, 4 overall, pair of second-place finishes to boot. So Kyle Larson obviously has performed to his expectations at Kansas, but we mentioned the testing and exactly what the level of engagement and focus will look like for the 5. Are they as concerned about a finish, or it's win or bust this weekend for HMS?
Yeah, so if we think about Kyle Larson in the last 3 races here at Kansas, he's been beaten by Toyotas and kind of beat him straight up. Kyle Larson was great here in the spring, but Denny Hamlin was better. And as much as I wish that Larson was able to win, as I was very heavy on Larson and almost nothing on Denny Hamlin, I wanted that. But you know what? Denny was a better car. And you know what? Kurt Busch last spring was also a better car when he passed Kyle Larson. And you look at Bubba Wallace last spring or last fall was also a better car. So as much as I want to say that Kyle Larson's going to be the guy to beat, and you know what? He probably will be after practice. He's just going to look better than everybody else. He's going to start ripping the high line. But he's good in the middle of the run, but he's not as good as some of these Toyotas in the past have been late in the run. And by the way, if you get a long green flag run, those Toyotas are going to be coming, and he has not beat any of them down the stretch. So, and by the way, he wouldn't beat Denny either last week. So I think that he's going to have to put together a complete race. I would say 6-1 is probably a very fair price. I don't see that going up or down no matter what. I just think that the Toyotas could unload a little faster. And because of that, I'm going to wait on playing Kyle Larson at that 6-1 price.
William Byron, mentioned him at 8-1. When we look at his current form, he's only led laps in 2 of the last 6 races. 877 laps led so far this season. Pretty impressive number there. Heating up at the right time, though, with 3 straight top 8 finishes. Previously had 5 straight finishes of 14th or worse. When we look at how he's performed at the mile and a half comps, first in Vegas, third at Kansas, and the first time around, second in Charlotte. As far as his overall track history, knowing he's 45 points clear of the cut line, top 10 finishes in 5 of 6 trips here, started inside the top 10 in 4 or 5 races. Didn't pick up any stage points here in the spring, which was a little bit surprising, despite his 3rd place finish.
Yeah, he started on the pole here too. Here's the thing with this 24 team. They've got 2 things going for them. They've got speed and they've minimal mistakes. Their pit crew has been nothing but a weapon all year long. That's what it takes to find yourself in the Final 4. If you're continually doing that, you can find yourself leading a race late. That's what Kyle Larson did last week. I thought he was a top 2 or 3 car, but you just want to find yourself leading after that last pit stop because you can go out there and make it happen. So I think William Byron is probably the safest guy. I would say from an outright, the favorites. I like him the most because he just makes the least amount of mistakes. You can't make mistakes anymore. And you can't make mistakes from Friday on. You better make it through tech without any issues because you don't want to lose your stall. You don't want to lose, a potential pass-through penalty. You don't want to lose a crew chief. All of those things are really important. So I think that the 2014 this year has done what Chase Elliott did last year. They found themselves with a race-winning car late in the races. They were able to capitalize because they weren't making mistakes. I think you see the same thing this week. I think Byron's going to qualify well. I think he runs in the top 5 all day. I think he's a solid play.
You talk about making mistakes. This is a driver that has found a way to make mistakes pretty much every racetrack we've gone to so far this season. That, of course, being the 20 car of Christopher Bell at 10-1. As far as current form is concerned, did lead 40 laps at Darlington, went off at a very short price. He'd only led 53 laps total in the prior 12 races. Just 6 top 5s this entire season. Only one of them has come since his win at Bristol back on Easter weekend. That was at Watkins Glen. His average finish, though, inside the top 13 is very respectable over the last 5 races, but he hasn't been able to put it all together. And when you look at his performances at intermediate tracks, they've been erratic at best. He's hovering right around the cut line. Accident here in the spring, finished 36th after starting 12th. The prior 3 starts, though, all resulted in top 8 finishes. Worm, this is a guy that I want no part of betting on or against. I feel like he can be fast, but I can make money going against him when the prices completely get out of whack, the way he's looked on Sunday morning throughout the betting market.
Well, you just have to tell me when he's going to make his mistake. Like, when is he going to hit the wall? When is he going to kind of take himself out? If you look at the last 5 races, his average starting spot is 6.2. That's best in the field. So, but you look at his average finish and it's 12.8. Well, that's not best in the field. Now, it's not outside the top 5, but it still goes to show you that he does nothing but tend to fade or make mistakes throughout the race. Clearly, there's 1 lap speed in the race car. He's just not able to put together long, continuous runs without making mistakes. So he's almost impossible to bet in matchups or even auxiliary stuff like top 5 or even matchups, because you just don't know what you're going to get. Now, I do like him to win races. I expect him to qualify very, very well this week. He's been fast, and the Toyota's been fast in qualifying and in race trim. But when's the mistake going to come? Because you know what's going to come. He has not run a clean race this whole summer. And it's hard to back him in anything but an outright price. And even if he goes and pulls it, what's he going to go down to 8-1? If Larson or Hamlin,
you look at the way he's priced, he could go down to 5-1. He's gone at 5 or 6. I think he closed at 6-1 at Darlington. So he's getting respect.
But when's he
in
been
the
the
market.
fastest car? When has he gone out there and just dominated a race? Even at a place like Loudon, where I thought he was really competitive, he goes out there. I think he pulled it, and Truex ran him down in 20 laps and passed him. And then he had a penalty and suffers again. So, gosh, I hate how unbettable he's become. He just the team and him on pit road, they've just been so inconsistent that if you're going to play him, you have to just play him in that 10-1 price. I wouldn't get involved in anything that's around that even money. But even if let's just say he qualifies on the pole 5-1, I don't want any piece of that either. So
no, exactly. You're not writing to bet him, even if he's got the fastest car. It's one of those things you go out there and prove it to me.
I would say this: if you like Chris Bell this week, take him to win the pole. That's what I would say, because at least he can just go 1 lap. He's not going to he could make a mistake, but he's not going to get a speeding penalty. He's not going to have a loose wheel, and he's not going to have a slow pit stop. So I think if you think Chris Bell is going to be strong this week, if he's strong, he's going to qualify well. I like him to win the pole more than I like his outright price at 10-1. And I'll double check his pole price as we kind of look up. That way I can address it.
No, it makes a ton of sense. And while you're doing that, we'll look at Tyler Reddick, another one driving a Toyota Hot Rod. As far as the 45 car in his current form, 3 top 8 finishes over his last 4 races. You look at how he's performed at 1.5 mile tracks: 5th at Charlotte, 9th at Kansas, 15th at Vegas. He did lead 90 laps that we referenced at the top of the show in his runner-up finish at Darlington, and he's given himself a little bit of breathing room, 30 points clear of the cut line. As far as his track history is concerned, he started inside the top 5 on all 3 trips here in the next-gen car, so qualifying has been a strength for Tyler Reddick. But a 9th place finish has been his best finish in 4 trips overall. Ended a 2-race run of 30th place outings. It is worth noting that his 35th place finish, if you're just looking at exactly where things went, came after a crash when he did lead 38 laps in that race. As far as looking at the spring performance, that was actually the first time he ever had a driver rating over 100 at this track. So things looking a little bit brighter for Tyler Reddick, given the speed that we're seeing seemingly on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think Tyler Reddick in this car at this track has been super fast from a qualifying perspective. I mean, his average start is 2.7. That's a great place to start your week, right? We want to make sure we're predicting where this market's going. And with an average start on three times at this track is 2.7, that's by far the best. Now, doesn't necessarily mean the finishes are there. If you look at his average finish, it's 24.7. That is struggling. However, if you look at current form, I don't think that his finishes are necessarily indicative of the car that he's had. I know that we don't really have comps from the summer, but he was very fast at Michigan. He had a chance to win at Richmond. And I think for a young driver like Tyler Reddick, it's important to just be in the mix. And the fact that you've had speed in the past few weeks is like, okay, if we can clean up some of these small mistakes, maybe catch a break or two, we could find ourselves in victory lane, just like Chris Buescher has. So although I don't love his finishes at this track, I think that, he had a couple blown tires. I think it was last fall. There was an issue when he had some fast laps. So I like Tyler Reddick, but at 10-1, pretty short. I think if you were, like that 12, 13, 14-1 range, I would say that would be a price you could move in on, because I do think he'll qualify well. And I think he's racing better than his finishes. I think Tyler Reddick could make some noise here in the playoffs.
Do you like Tyler Reddick's teammate in Bubba Wallace, who's been bet down a little bit from where he opened earlier this week? Price is right around 20-1. He's consensus in that 12 or 14-1 range. His average finish over his last 5 races is actually better than if you look at his season-long form, so he's trending in the right direction. However, no finish better than 8th in his last 8 races, but no finish worse than 18th. Just 4 top 5s this season, but 3 of them came in a run of Kansas, Darlington, and Charlotte back in May. He's hovering right around the cut line. When we look at track history for Bubba Wallace, 3 straight top 10s at this track, highlighted by his win here last fall. Win was the first time he started inside the top 10 in 8 races, so clearly track position played a role. Stage points in 5 of 6 stages in the next-gen car, and back-to-back driver ratings of 113 or better. If the 23 has his eyes set on a victory, he better do it this weekend, because a much better chance to be able to get to victory lane here than at Bristol next weekend.
Oh, for sure. I love 23XI or 45XI. What did you want to call it?
I called it 45XI.
45XI.
Apparently we're going 23XI for Jordan's original number, not the number he wore as a baseball player when he came back to the NBA.
So last year, 23XI swept this race with Kurt Busch and then Bubba Wallace. You had them beat Toyota's also very fast in the spring race earlier this year. I anticipate Bubba to be great. I think that if you look at his 3 finishes at this track, I think the most important metric to look at is his driver rating of 107. Like that's a lot of consistency. The other thing, Bubba's been under a tremendous amount of pressure to make the playoffs. He also did not have a great starting spot and had kind of a rough day at Darlington, and he was able to get a solid finish out of him. I mean, Bubba finished 7th last week. I don't know that he was ever really a 7th place car, but he's been kind of getting it done with average cars on tracks where he tends to struggle. We're now coming to a track where he's really good. I love Bubba at this 20-1. We were able to get down a little bit at that first open, but I still like Bubba at 14-1. I think he's going to qualify well, and I anticipate him to kind of hang around the top 5 all day long.
Your man crush, Kyle Busch, 16-1. Current form, just 1 top 10 over his last 5 races, just 1 top 3 over his last 8 races. He's led just 7 laps in the last 10 races. So you talk about lacking speed, the 8 would be the poster child for that. 6th at Charlotte, 35th at Kansas, 14th at Vegas. He does have a little bit of breathing room in terms of the cut line. When we look at his track history, 3 of his last 4 trips here, he's finished 26th or worse. The last 2 races, he started 16th or worse, so he's been forced to come through the field. I mean, let's be honest here. No consistency here at this track, and we haven't seen a lot of consistency from the 8 car of RCR at 1.5 intermediate tracks at all so far this season.
Yeah, I just think it's a snazzy price. That's what I put down in my notes. I
You
don't
say
think
that every week with
it's
Kyle
a snazzy
Busch.
price.
You
Todd.
get lured in by
think
Kyle Busch every he's
snazzy.
He's drifting. I think we should get a little bit of exposure.
I know.
10 laps in. Hey, Worm, Kyle Busch is down a lap and he's already bitching on the radio.
Yeah, it's a decent price. That's the only argument I could really make. There's no explanation or like, well, you could find something here or there. Listen, he's got to go out there and run a clean race. And this 8 team has done it twice, and they let a lot of laps. And well, I guess in non-plate races or non-super speedway races, and that was Fontana and Gateway. But if all of a sudden there's a little adversity, Kyle just, if he all of a sudden doesn't think he's running where he should be, it's like he just goes back to where, like, he just loses his mind. And he's kind of just, he's just struggled. I don't know what else to say. Like, we had him top 10. He struggles last week.
Whoever we bet top 10 finishes 11th or 12th. I mean, that's been fait accompli so far this season as it pertains to our top 10 catalog of bets.
Yeah, he's just a tough guy, a tough guy to cap. Listen, I don't think he's going to go drift out higher than 16-1. If he does, I'll fire. I don't care how bad he looks in practice. Like, you're getting Kyle Busch at a 1.5 mile track. Typically, historically, just over his career, he's been really fast at places like this, but you're only as good as your car these days. And the only thing I can say is the price isn't bad, but I don't have anything to say, oh, because of this or this, you should bet him. Does that make sense? Is that a fair assessment?
Putting that on a t-shirt, you're only as good as your car. Go figure. Yeah, we're talking about auto racing. You're only as good as your car.
You're only as good as your car.
The driver can only make up 3 to 5 positions max.
Exactly.
Ross Chastain, the same price as Kyle Busch. When we look at his current form, 2 top 10s over his last 5 races. Since his win at Nashville, his average finish is 18th overall. 1.5 mile track's a mixed bag. 22nd at Charlotte, 5th at Kansas, 12th at Vegas. 13 points clear of the cut line, if my math is correct. When we look at his track history, 3 straight finishes, 7th or better since he's been driving the next-gen car. Started all of those races from 11th on the grid or better. Stage points in 7 of the last 8 stages here, and that includes the final trip he made to Kansas as a driver for Chip Ganassi Racing.
Yeah, Ross is pretty good here. An average starting spot of 6.3 over the 3 races in this next-gen car. That's also been his finish. He's got 1 top 5. I talked about this on the betting show with Derek Yoder. If Ross Chastain has a car capable of winning the race, I feel like he could go out and win, but he could also make a stupid mistake trying to win the race. But if he thinks he's like a 7th or 8th place car, he kind of just rides around in 7th and 8th and takes his medicine. So I think that there's almost more pressure on Chastain to get a good finish when he has a great car versus when he just has an average car. Whenever he has a great car, he thinks he should go out there and lead all these laps, and he's just going to door somebody or wreck Larson or do something to try to take the lead, and he just takes himself completely out. Whereas he might have had a top 5 car last week. I don't know that he did, but he may have thought that. He just bided his time and was able to just get a decent finish. So there's something about having an average car to track and just getting a good finish that, especially in this playoffs when you can't make mistakes, it's kind of nice. I actually don't like Ross's outright price. I do like Ross in matchups or maybe a top 10 if I had to choose, just because I don't think he's going to be the best car. I think that'll be the Toyotas, maybe a Larson, maybe a Byron. But I think when it comes to these Chevys, I think you could look at Ross Chastain kind of being the next wave of fast Chevys. And if he doesn't think of a race-winning car, I think he'd be happy to take his medicine, get some points in stage 1, some points in stage 2, get a top 10 finish, and then go ahead and take your chances at just a solid run at Bristol and move on to the next round.
Let's throw a blanket over this next tandem of drivers, teammates for RFK Racing. Brad Keselowski and Chris Busch are both 18-1. Seen a little bit of money come in on each of these guys. Brad down from 20, Chris as high as 25 I saw earlier this week. When we look at Bad Brad, 4 top 6 finishes over his last 6 races, so clearly figuring things out. His average finish so far this season, a shade better than 14th, actually 6th best in the Cup Series, just 6 top 5s, but he's been consistent overall. However, consistency as it pertains to 1.5 mile tracks may not be a good thing. 19th at Charlotte, 19th at Kansas, 17th at Vegas. When we look at how he's run at Kansas of late, 4 straight finishes of 14th or worse. Before that, though, he did have a 3-race run with no finish worse than 4th. So when he's got a good car, this is a track where he's had some success in the past. Chris Buescher, meanwhile, you talked a little bit about his model of consistency. His average finish the last 6 races is 4th. That's not a typo. That's not a misprint. That's how good and consistent the 17 has been with 3 wins. Plenty of breathing room as far as the cut line is concerned. He has trended positively, though, at 1.5 mile tracks. If we go back to Vegas, he finished 21st, was 17th at Kansas the first time around, and then 8th at Charlotte for the Coke 600. But his best career finish here at Kansas is 8th if I'm looking at these two teammates, which driver has the upside, which has the more consistency, or is it the same driver that fits the profile for both?
I think that they both have tremendous upside just as a team. I'll say that I'd give the edge to Buescher. I don't think that Kansas is quite the driver's track that Darlington is. I think that it just more. I mean, I don't necessarily want to like take anything away from Kansas, but if you had speed at Michigan, it's more likely that you'll have speed at Kansas than Darlington. So I'm going to give a slight edge to Chris Buescher on that. I think that there's something about the confidence of knowing you have the car underneath you. He can drive it in a little bit deeper in qualifying, and he kind of expects to run top 5 now. And Chris Buescher is a really talented driver. Man, these two guys over the last 5 races, you're looking at the best average finishes in NASCAR. That is shocking. If you were to tell me that at the beginning of the year that Chris Buescher would have a 4.6 average finish and Brad Keselowski was a 9.4 average finish, I'd tell you you're nuts. So I like both of these guys. I think they both have tremendous upside. I like Buescher a little bit more just because of the Michigan factor.
Well, he did show horsepower there. And he showed that he was able to fend off a challenge that came from Martin Truex Jr. when we looked at how he was able to go out there and fend off 2 pushes from the 19 and grabbing the win at that 2-mile oval. That's one of the fastest tracks on the circuit. We'll see if some of that translates here. But keeping along the same train of thought, when we're talking about the Ford camp, 3 other drivers that are priced in a similar range would be Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, and Kevin Harvick, all right around that 18 on the low end, upwards of 22. And if we kind of lay things out a little bit, I mean, Ryan Blaney doesn't have a finish better than 9th over his last 12 races, but he's finished 9th 4 times during that span, does have 16-point cushion to the cut line. He has that first place, that winning race car at Charlotte, was 16th at Kansas, 13th at Vegas. Since joining Team Penske, 7th is his best finish here. Meanwhile, Joey Logano, roller coaster of a season to say the least. He's found real difficulty when it comes to sustaining consistency. Led just 43 laps over his last 15 races. Finished 6th here back in the spring. Stage points in 4 of 6 stages when it comes to Kansas in the next-gen car. And, of course, Kevin Harvick, 1.5 mile track. I almost feel like you can pencil him in for a high floor of 12th. The question is, does he have a race-winning ceiling, or can he get himself into the top 5?
Yeah, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head with Kevin Harvick, so I'm not even going to go there. Typically been a great track for him. Just only 2 top 15s here in this car is a little bit concerning. I remember trying to fade him the first time, at first go at this track last spring, didn't go over well. He just kind of knows how to get around, but hasn't had speed. It's almost been like he's been kind of fighting to stay on the lead lap and just kind of, hope for like a top 12 finish. Now, definitely coming off a solid week, but this is a completely different track. It's not as much of a driver's track as Darlington. We look at Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano. For one, the last 1.5 mile track we had, Ryan Blaney went out there and beat the dog shit out of everybody. It didn't matter where he restarted, and that was Charlotte. That was a long damn time ago. So do I expect Ryan Blaney to come out here and blow the doors off everybody? No. But if you look at the last data point, that's kind of it. So it'll be interesting to see how this Ryan Blaney unloads. I think this is kind of the most intriguing, like, non-storyline is, okay, where will Blaney unload on the next 1.5 mile track? Because the last one we had, he dominated. Joey Logano, he's a tough guy to put your finger on. It's weird seeing this 22 car not even be like a top 3 or 4 Ford. Not a top 3 or 4 car. He's not a top 3 or 4 Ford. You got to put both RFK cars ahead of him and Kevin Harvick. So it's right now interesting because I don't want to count Joey Logano out because obviously he'd go out and win at any track. And he's obviously a 2-time champion, but geez, you got to show me something. And I just haven't seen much out of the guy. 12th place finish last week, but never really in the mix the whole day. So I think he's probably properly priced. I think the most intriguing is Blaney. The worst bet would be Logano. And I'm not opposed to someone playing a little bit on Harvick because he could have a race-winning car. I think that you're spot on. And the worst he could probably run is like that 12th to 15th. But will he have a race-winning car? We're not going to find out until he unloads.
Very good point. When we look at the playoff drivers, no disrespect meant to Ricky Stenhouse or Michael McDowell, but I would be absolutely stunned if either of those two found themselves to be running inside the top 10, top 5, or top 3. during Sunday's race. But as always, as we'll do throughout the course of the postseason, want to give you an opportunity if there are any non-playoff drivers that you feel are worth highlighting in terms of the outright market or some of the ancillary derivative pricing that's caught your eye.
Well, there's two guys that I want to talk about. Excuse me. Number one, we got to talk about Chase Elliott. He's like 20-1. Listen, I'm not a huge Chase Elliott guy. I think that he clearly doesn't have the year that we thought he was going to have, injured. And, obviously that the incident with Denny Hamlin, I thought was kind of the most intriguing incident, just blatantly dooring him and getting him into the wall. But if you look at his average start, at these tracks, it's not necessarily very good. I mean, he's behind Chase Briscoe, Daniel Suarez, Austin Dillon, Joey Logano. I mean, this is just not one of those tracks that suits him in this car. Now, if you want to talk about average finishes, obviously, still not great. He's 15.7. I mean, we're talking about someone that's won a championship and the most popular driver, just not there. And I would be shocked if he just unloaded fast and then just beat the brakes off the field. So at this point, I don't know what to think of him. But the other guy I want to talk about is Ty Gibbs. I think that Ty in these Toyotas, with the Toyotas being fast, Ty Gibbs is going to be fast. Now, can he put a complete race together? I'm not quite sure, but the speed is going to be in the race car. And it's only a matter of time before he starts kind of mixing it up with the top 3 or 4 cars before he gets a win. When he opened up at 60-1, we nibbled a little bit there. He's down to 35. I don't love that, but I do think he could qualify well and potentially, maybe run top 7 or 8 throughout the race.
Tyler Randall Gibbs, by the way, is Ty's full name. Since we've called him everything under the sun, we should at least put a little bit of respect on his name. Tyrone Gibbs would have been a little bit of an outlier there, but clearly the 54 car, if he's not going to realize his upside this year, he will find it in the future. And there is no doubt he will be a runaway rookie of the year since Noah Gragson is no longer eligible for said reward. Speaking of Noah Gragson, we did get an announcement earlier today that we know who's going to be driving the 42 car for Legacy Motorsports. John Hunter Nemechek gets his cup of coffee in the Cup Series yet again. There is no doubt there may not be a single driver that has shown more maturity in terms of what he was way back when. Whether it's getting married and having kids or a variety of other factors that have played a role in you're seeing his talent on full display. And I think that's a great seat. Maybe a little bit too early for Carson Hocevar to make the jump from trucks up to Cup, despite you doing everything you possibly could to pander for him to get a ride. So maybe he'll hire you as his PR guy going forward. That is the checkered flag for the Stay Green podcast as we head into Kansas. As always, you can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. And most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, you can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, this is the portion of the program where we try and get people to the window with what we like to call the best bet.
Yeah, we've been consistently going like 1-1 every week where we win one, lose one. And it's been so tough. So if you look at some of the reasons that we've lost these, it's because of a late race mistake, whether it's, and I think that the Kevin Harvick last week, that was brutal because I know Buescher had a good finish and listen, we were wrong about Chris Buescher, but we weren't wrong about Harvick, and Harvick was beating Buescher all day long. So even though we were wrong about Buescher, we were right about Harvick or we were right that he was going to be good all day long. So we lost kind of in a fluky way there. We're able to get it back with a Larson over Truex, but we just have to avoid mistakes. And when you look at a team that's just avoided the least amount of mistakes this year, I think it's William Byron, that 24 team. They unload with speed. They're going to qualify well. They just haven't made mistakes, and their pit crew's been a little bit more of a weapon than a thorn. So with that, I like William Byron top 5 at even money or better. I think you can find some plus 110, some plus 120, but I like William Byron to finish in the top 5 at even money or better. I think that's our best bet of the week.
I like it. A little pre-week on the 24. We've seen consistent speed from HMS. We know that Toyotas will be a force to be reckoned with, to say the least. And we'll see if our Sunday best bet that we'll share on the website, as we always do, carries a little bit of Toyota flavor there as we try and identify exactly which cars we'll have to watch a little bit closer once we see everybody unload and go through practice. All right, my friend, we've done as much damage as we can do here this fine Wednesday night. For all of our listeners that are tuning in, by the way, I forgot to remind them at the top of the show and last week, with football season in full swing, Stay Green, you can count on getting to your inbox first thing Friday mornings instead of Thursday, as we've done throughout the regular season. So don't panic if you're downloading the podcast and subscribed on Spotify, Wondery, Apple, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. You'll have it for the morning drive on Friday, despite us still recording at the same time on Wednesday night. We will do everything in our power, as always, to make sure we don't blow up those markets well in advance of you guys being able to get down at the prices we've shared. Anything else you'd like to get off your chest, Wormser, before we close up shop here when we reconvene next week, before we go to the half-mile concrete oval at Thunder Valley?
No, I think that I think that this first round's going to be really interesting to see how some of these guys, some of these drivers go to Kansas. And if they have speed, I'm looking at guys like Truex. I'm looking at guys like Blaney. Like, are they going to unload with some speed? And then we also have a track in Bristol in this round where we have not seen anything like this. So I think the next couple of weeks is going to be really interesting. And then we have the round of 12 where, man, it is going to be, you're going to see guys that you thought could just march their way through the playoffs are going to start to struggle. They're going to find themselves in a must-win scenario at the Roval, and it's going to be really interesting. So I'm excited for the playoffs. I think that NASCAR has done a great job of promoting that. I think Daytona going into the playoffs is super exciting. And it's nice to be sitting on a Larson ticket, which I hope everyone is. We've been kind of harping on that all week, or at least I've been harping on it all week, or at least for a while now. So I think Larson runs well again this week, but I hope that he's doing a little bit of testing for Texas. That's important.
No doubt about it. You want to have the best cars you possibly can going forward, and we'll bang the drum until we're blue in the face that it's all about being able to win early in a given phase of the playoffs, because it allows you to work on things going forward, since those wins, other than the bonus points, don't carry over. For Chris Werme, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck with all of your Kansas investments this weekend. And with a William Byron top 5 ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.